So let's begin chapter 2, where, of course, we'll be talking about the US Constitution. If you look at the Constitution there, you see those first three words, we the people. It's that reminder that the authority of the United States government is supposed to rest with the citizens, with the people themselves, and not any one particular political leader, but the people having the authority and power to choose their government. We're going to learn about the Constitution in all of these videos, but in this particular video, we're going to be learning about the intellectual roots. And we're asking this question, which is, what is it that inspired the Constitution? We're going to look at a couple of things today. First, we're going to look at a very famous political philosopher who deeply influenced things like the Declaration and the Constitution. We're also going to be learning about some of the early colonial experiences and how that shaped the views of the American colonists. Sometimes when I am teaching this material in a classroom, I'll ask students to partner up and try to answer these two questions. The first question is, what are rights? You hear that term so much in politics today. We talk about our rights and, we want to make sure that our rights are respected, but what are they? It's really important to know what rights are and what your rights are, because if you don't know about them, if you don't know what rights you have, it's a lot easier for somebody to take advantage of that situation and deprive you of your rights. Well, that also leads us to another question, which is, where do our rights come from? There are multiple ways of answering these questions. And in this video, we're going to be looking at a philosopher whose ideas deeply influenced the United States founding documents, its founding generation, and of course, generations of Americans to come. And that man is John Locke. Now, John Locke was an English political philosopher and politician who lived from 1632 up until 1704. And he lived at a very interesting time in English history because things were really changing. It was a very contentious time in some ways. Now, as he was writing about politics and observing politics, one of the real milestones in English history that he witnessed was this event called the Glorious Revolution. We're not going to go too deep into the weeds on what the Glorious Revolution was, but just for basics, you can understand that it was a relatively bloodless revolution that took place where an unpopular king, King James II, was overthrown and replaced with William and Mary. Shortly following this period of time, there was a real expansion in the formal recognition of the rights of English citizens. And that was codified in the English Bill of Rights, which outlined certain rights that English citizens had, like the ability to consent to taxation and the right to a fair trial. Watching all of this unfold was very influential for Locke. And as he would later write about in his political writings, it really shaped his views about rights, what they were, where they came from, the role of government. And in this time, when we talk about government, we're really talking about the role of the monarch. Let's dive into Locke's ideas, his most important ideas being about rights, the social contract, the role of government, and so forth. We're going to start with rights. Now, for rights, for John Locke, his view of rights were that they were given by God. Every single human being, that means me recording this and you watching this on your device, both of us, everybody else, we're endowed by God, according to Locke, with certain rights. And those rights include things like life, liberty, and property. He calls these natural rights. When you hear that word nature, you might think about going up into the mountains and now you're seeing the trees and the birds and the water. And we think of that as nature, but guess what? You're part of nature too. And so am I, and so are everybody else. So when we say natural rights, we're talking about the natural order of things. The fact that we are born as human beings, according to Locke, means that at the moment of our birth, we have these rights that are part of our human identity. You have probably heard people talk about this concept of human rights. You hear that a lot today, especially when we talk about things that are happening around the world where people's rights are being violated. There's this understanding today that all people have some fundamental rights, and we know that governments don't always respect them. That idea of human rights really grows out of this idea of natural rights and some of these ideas that Locke was talking about. Let's start with the first one. For Locke, the most important right that exists is your right to life. What did he mean by that? He means that nobody should be able to come up and take your life or to gravely harm you. And for him, this was the most important one. Why is life the most important? Well, because without it, all of the other rights, forget about freedom of speech or whatever, right? If you're not alive, the other rights don't really matter. So for Locke, life was the number one most important right that you had. Next comes liberty. You know that liberty is a synonym for freedom. Locke believed that you should have personal autonomy. You should have the ability to make decisions in your own life, provided that you're living, in a way that doesn't harm other people, that you're not violating their liberties, that you should have the ability to make decisions for yourself. The third one for Locke was not the pursuit of happiness. We got life, liberty, pursuit of happiness comes later. The third one is going to be property. Here, Locke said that if you go out and you work and by your own effort, you are able to create something, or maybe you're able to purchase something and you own it, nobody should be able to come and take that away from you. That's going to be one of your fundamental rights as well. This gets us into, for Locke, beginning to think about the role of government. Why do we have a government? If I ask you that question today, why do we have a government? I bet a lot of you would say things like, well, because, we need a military maybe, or we need schools and roads, and we need to kind of get this stuff that makes our life easier. Locke, he kind of goes higher order than that. For him, it's not about that other stuff. It's really, there's one most important reason that we have a government, and that is to protect your liberties. All of those things that we just talked about, your life, your liberty, your property, the number one most important role for a government is to protect those rights. And so this gets us into this idea that Locke talked a lot about, which is called the social contract. There are two other very notable political theorists who are writing around the same time, Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. They also had their own conceptions of the social contract. We're really going to narrow in on what Locke had to say. Now, for Locke, the social contract is this idea that in a society, we all come together and we agree, even if it's just kind of a tacit agreement. We never really actually said it or wrote it out on paper. We agree that we're going to live under a certain set of rules and we're going to live under a certain government, like a king. And in exchange for that, we're going to get something very important. The king is going to get legitimacy and authority, which is really nice to have. But in exchange, we are also supposed to live in a system where our rights are protected. Your life, your liberty, your property are going to be protected by government. We call that the social contract. This really connects to the authority of the monarch. Now, within European history, there was this idea. If you ask somebody, why is it the king that's in charge and not me or my friend? The reason the king was appointed was this idea called the divine right of kings. It's the idea that the king was appointed by God. And because God appointed the king, we should listen to the king. Now, that's not the view that Locke had. He actually flipped it around. He says, the reason that the king is in charge is because of the consent of the governed. What does that mean? Well, what does consent mean? If that you consent to something, you're saying yes, you're saying that it's okay. And who are the governed? The governed is me, it's you, it's everybody else out there who lives under the king, or in our present day, that would be the president and the politicians and all of that. So we are the governed. The reason that the president of the United States has their job is not because God appointed that person to be the president. It's because we all came together, we had an election, and we assented, we gave our consent to that person being in charge. And so that's going to be a really important part of Locke's philosophy. The power of government. It's not just that it's hereditary. It's not just that God appointed this person. It's that the people get to choose. Now, a second ago, I told you the most important job of that king is what? It's to make sure that they're protecting your natural God-given rights. And Locke said, you have one other right that we haven't talked about yet. That's the right to revolt. And what he meant by that was, let's say that you get a corrupt king or a corrupt politician in place who is not paying attention to your rights. In other words, they're violating your rights. If they're not living up to their requirement and duty to uphold your fundamental rights, they have broken the social contract. And when the social contract is broken and the government is not respecting people's fundamental rights and liberties, Locke says you have one additional right, which is the right to revolution. You have the right to revolt. You have the right to overthrow the monarch, and you have the right to institute a new one. You can put a new leader in place who will respect those rights. These are very important ideas. And guess what? In a future video, we're going to look at them once again, except in a different context, and that's going to be the American context. These ideas of John Locke were so deeply influential to the founding generation, but his ideas were not the only thing that was influencing them. We should also talk about the colonial experience. Now, there were 13 colonies at the time of the writing of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to talk about them in a little bit in a future video. Right now, though, we're going to look at the first two colonies that were set up and the reasons that they were set up. Your first permanent colony in North America was the Jamestown colony, which is in present-day Virginia. The reason it was set up was because there were other European powers, of course, that were coming to the New World and North America and claiming land and also trying to extract resources. This was at a time when Europe was finding out about all kinds of plants and animals and different resources that they maybe hadn't known about before. And this trading post was set up in Virginia in order to be profitable and to make money. So one of the reasons that people came to the New World was in order to seek profit. And we still see this today, the idea of the American dream, of people wanting to come to the United States to find their fortune, so to speak. The second colony that got established was the Plymouth colony. Many of you, when you were in elementary school, probably heard stories about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower. And of course, you know that these were religious Puritans who were not freely allowed to practice their own religion in Europe. So what did they decide to do? Let's set out to the New World and we'll find a place where we can worship in the way that we want to. So you see that there were at least two reasons why at least European or English people were coming to the New World, and one of those being religious freedom, the other one being about making a profit. Now, when these colonists came to North America, the king granted them a charter. A charter is written permission giving you the ability to set up your own system and make rules and laws for yourself. And that seems like a really interesting thing to do. I mean, like, if you're the king, why would you want to give away some of your power so that people can make decisions on their own? Wouldn't it be better if they checked in with you? Well, of course, you can think about, like in the 1700s, why you wouldn't want to do that. You would have to get on a boat and you'd have to sail all the way back to England, ask the king, and then restock, and then come all the way back. It's a whole hassle. It's not like today where we can just shoot an email or a text or FaceTime your friend from anywhere in the world. Back then, it was very difficult. And so what ends up happening is you get this tradition in the colonies of local self-rule. The colonies would establish representative government, where male citizens would be able to vote for somebody to represent them, and then they would go off and they would make the rules in a similar way to what was happening, say, in Parliament in England. Now, that history of local decision-making is going to be very important later on when that becomes challenged by the king. We're going to learn a little bit about that. So the colonists had this history of being able to make decisions for themselves. These are some of those early influences on the Constitution. The idea that people should represent themselves, the idea of a relative degree of autonomy from England, and these ideas about rights and the role of government and citizens that we get from Locke. In our next video, we're going to learn about what leads up to the American Revolution. Why did the colonists find it necessary to fight a war with their own country? I'll see you there.